Hey guys, my name is Royce Hunt Bell, owner and operator of Roycycled Treasures, and I'm super excited to share this project with you guys. You guys, we are seriously going to make something really cute using 2 cans out of my kitchen. I've already opened them on both sides, and a piece of scrap lumber from my wood pile. We're gonna need a little bit though to zhuzh this up, right? So just a few things. We'll start off with a layer of Wise Owl paint. We'll be using Antique Via. It's a nice warm white. And then we'll be stamping on some barn planks using my Iron Orchid design stamp, the Barnwood blank stamp. We'll be using IOD's ink in stone gray. And of course, I got to use my stamp pad, right, to make this work. We'll be topping off with the 2 cans that we'll be smushing and making pockets with. And then we'll be using some recycled decoupage paper to bring those cans to life. So stick around, you guys. Let's get started. Now, before we get started, we're going to have to smush this can. Because I have no hand strength, I'm going to use my arms to push this together. I'm really focusing on the heels of my hand. I'll pinch those corners together, and there I go. I have a super cute pocket. Now, to start our project, we have to make a really nice foundation. I'll be using Wise Owl's chalk style paint and Antique Via. It's a nice warm white. The brush I'm using is Wise Owl's micro angle brush. It's one of my favorite for small projects like these. I'm going to lay down 2 coats of paint to make sure that I have full coverage, and make sure and get your edges because you want your project to look good from all sides. Now that that's covered, I'll set that aside so that we can work on our stamp. When you get a brand new stamp from Iron Orchid Design, you want to condition your stamp first. I'm removing the plastic that comes on it, and I'll save this because I can use this to actually make stamps later. To condition your stamp, you're going to take a 220 grit sandpaper or sanding block, and you're going to sand lightly in both directions. This gives your stamps tooth so that they hold more product, and you get sharper images when you stamp with them. I don't use acrylic stamping blocks. I just cut my pieces right off of the plastic backing that they come on, and I just use them like that. So I'll go ahead and disassemble this stamp. Look at all these yummy pieces that comes with this stamp, you guys. You can create so many different variations of Barnwood using all these different pieces. I love this stamp. Before I get started, I'm going to have to load my stamp pad with some ink. You guys, do not use as much ink as I used in this video. You want to use about half as much. I'm really careful to leave some space on the edges so that when I work my ink into my pad, it doesn't spill over on the sides. If it spills over, it's not a deal breaker. It's just a pain because it's just always going to be there. I'll be using my Iron Orchid Design brayer with my Barnwood stamp for this portion. After I decide what I'm going to use, I love my brayer because it gives me a lot of control. I just roll it right over my stamp pad and over my stamps. Now, when you put your stamp down, you want to make sure that you set it straight down and you don't shift it once it's on your surface. I'm just rubbing it right now, and I'll pull it straight up so that I get a nice, clean, crisp stamp. And I'll repeat this process with all the different yummy pieces that comes with this Barnwood stamp. I want it to look like an old piece of barnwood that I just found somewhere. And so all these different textures are going to go really far to help me accomplish that look. And I'm laying them down in a rather irregular pattern because I don't want it to look contrived or planned out. Look at that cross cut. Love. I even get 2 knots, and you can pull those knots off and use them separately. You don't have to use them the way I've used it here in this application. And again, I'm just rolling ink onto my pad, and I'll apply that over my surface. When I'm done stamping with these, they're a super easy cleanup. I have an old toothbrush by my kitchen sink, and I just use Dawn dishwashing liquid water and my old toothbrush to get these cleaned after each use. I'm actually going to use the same stamp. I'm just going to use the other half that I didn't use on that side. Now the cool thing about this stamp is look at the diversity of the pieces, right? So I have this little skinny part on the side that I want to add some more texture to, and it's super easy using this skinny piece from the stamp. I'm flipping it over to line up the ridge of this stamp with the ridge of the stamp that I used before. And it doesn't look like I stamped all the way to the edge of my board, so I'm just going to go back in and add some more texture so that it looks consistent with the rest of the piece. Now, you guys, these pieces are super cool because I can use them to make nails on my board. I think I want some more texture over these knots, so I'm just going to add this really quickly. And you guys see how different each of the stamp pieces are and how much character they can bring to your work. So I'm just going to load this up, and it's just 4 nails, and I can sit this anywhere on my board and it'll look like my boards have been nailed together. Super cool, right? The Barnwood stamp is so versatile. Sometimes I'll use it on the background of a project just to add some texture so that it's not like just white or just plain. You get 2 of the nail stamps with your Barnwood stamp, and one has a little bit more texture than the other, so they're a little different. And there you have it. I have my Barnwood piece now. It doesn't just look like a piece of plywood that I found in my wood pile. Now, when you're using Iron Orchid Design ink, you want to make sure that your ink doesn't just dry, but that it actually cures. So if you want your ink to cure, you have 2 options. You can either let it sit overnight, about 12 hours is fine, so that it cures and it sets. But I like to cheat. I'm not patient, so I use my craft gun, which has heat, and so the heat will actually set the ink. Now that I've loaded this stamp, I can use it over and over again. Now to the cans, or to the pockets, should I say. We're going to decoupage these pockets, but first I want to put a coat of white paint on them. You don't have to paint white under your decoupage, but if I'm going to decoupage an image onto my surface, I really want that image to pop. So I'll put white underneath so that the image is in the foreground of my project and you can really see it. Just a second coat to make sure I get full coverage, and I'm going to go ahead and paint the back of my cans so that my project looks good from every angle. Soup cans, you guys. Seriously. Soup cans. I wait for my paint to dry, and now I'm ready to decoupage. This is Roycycled decoupage paper that we'll be using today. These sheets come in 20-inch by 30-inch. They're 18-pound tissue paper. I'm going to use this small section for today's project. I love all of these bustiers in this ad. The name of this paper, by the way, is Vintage Ads, and it is by Roycycled Decoupage. This will be large enough for me to cover both cans, and the rest of this piece I'll just put away and I'll use it another day on another project. I'm just going to set my paper down to gauge how much paper I need. I'm not going to cut it exact because I'll be able to trim it later, and I'll show you guys how I do that. Today I'll be using Wise Owl's Varnish to decoupage. I use the matte formula because it's my favorite, but you can also get it in glossy and satin as well. So I'm going to cover my can completely, making sure not to leave any portions uncovered, and then lay down my decoupage paper. You guys will notice that I'm working from one side to the other. That's the easiest way to push out any air bubbles because they're going to be pushed out as I go across the paper. And see how easily that lays down? Now these cans have ridges, and so you can use plastic, but I couldn't find plastic, you guys. So I'm just using a paper towel to kind of push the paper down into those ridges because I kind of want them to show through the paper. Using plastic or even a paper towel reduces the friction so that you can rub your paper a little more without fear of tearing it. And of course, I'm going to do the same thing to the second can. Now that each of them are dry, I can trim them. I'm using a 220 grit sanding block and I'm simply sanding the edges. You guys will note that I'm only sanding in one direction. If you sand across, you can tear your paper. If you sand up, you risk lifting your paper. So I only sand down when I'm trimming my projects. Just a little product under the edges to ensure everything is laying down, and then I'll seal it. I love using Wise Owl's varnish to decoupage and seal because I know my projects will last. Same thing with the second can, and I'll put another layer of Wise Owl varnish over the top to help seal and protect that so that it will endure. Whatever it's going to endure on the wall, but you know what I'm saying. When you're making stuff to sell in a booth or in your shop, you really want to make sure that your projects are going to last. Now those two are done. So I've let my board sit for a little while. So before I move forward, I'm going to go ahead and seal it with a coat of Wise Owl's varnish. The piece looks really stark, and so I've kind of decided halfway through that I want to glaze this. If I glaze directly over the chalk paint, it'll absorb a lot of the glaze. It'll get really dark really fast. And so I put a layer of the varnish down first and let that dry, and now I'm going to go in with the glaze to warm this up just a bit. For my glaze, I'm using Wise Owl's glaze. This particular mixture is my favorite. It's a 50-50 mix of Wise Owl's Java and Wise Owl's Black Walnut. I think the Java gives it a nice warmth, and the Black Walnut brings in the depth of color, and together I just think that they're perfect. I'm using my misting spray bottle to spray over the surface just so that the glaze moves more. I don't want a super heavy coat. I'm going to lay this down, and then I will go over it with my paper towel and wipe off the excess glaze. And you guys see how that warms it up, and it doesn't look so stark. Now, I probably should have done this before I decoupaged the cans. So I'm drilling holes in the back here. I'm pre-drilling the holes so that I can screw this onto the board. I'm putting the board underneath so I don't screw a hole in my table. I want to make sure that my glaze is dry and set, and then I'm going to go ahead and put another layer of varnish on top of the glaze to protect it. And whoops, I almost forgot to glaze my edges, you guys. We want the project to look good from all sides, right? Now to screw my cans onto my piece of plywood. I'm using a driver to screw my screws in. I use a driver instead of a drill because my hand strength is not like that great, and the driver has a lot more torque. So I find that it's really helpful in my shop when I'm working on things to use a driver instead of a regular drill. Super tiny screws, you guys. They're only like 1/4 of an inch. Just enough so the cans will be secure on my piece of plywood. I found these floral foam pieces at the Dollar Tree. You get like 4 of the small ones and 2 of the larger ones in a pack for $1. I'm hot gluing them in the can because I'm pretty sure that these cans will always be used for like a floral arrangement or for greenery, and I want to make sure they're secured. I'm using a high heat glue gun to glue these pieces of foam in here. I just trimmed them so that the bottom is a wedge. So it'll fit really well into the bottom of my can. I don't want the foam to stick out too far over the top because I don't want to use moss, you guys. I'm just being lazy. And that's it. Here is my project using a scrap piece of lumber and 2 soup cans. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Be sure and subscribe to get more projects.